Ukraine's president says U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will visit Kyiv Sunday. CBS News has confirmed Secretary Blinken's planned trip. The Pentagon is not commenting on Secretary Austin. They would be the highest-ranking U.S. officials to visit the country since the start of Russia's invasion nearly 2 months ago. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy made the announcement in a press conference Saturday. He also told reporters he feels he does not have the right to fear Russia, given the bravery of Ukraine's people. He added he has no trust for Russia at all.
The trust for our partners to us is the highest level, but there is no trust to Russia. Those are not synonyms, those are antonyms, Russia and trust, because they're just saying something and their words do not coincide with actions.
Charlie D'Agata is standing by in Vinnytsia, Ukraine, with more. Hi there, Charlie. So tell us, how important is the symbolism of an American visit for people in Ukraine right now, especially given the high-ranking nature of these particular officials?
It is of huge symbolic importance to the people of Ukraine and to President Zelenskyy himself. He has reached out to the United States multiple times, including his address to Congress. He has shown that the United States is an important partner in the fight against Russia. And it's not only important to the people of Ukraine and the people of President Zelenskyy himself, it sends a message to Moscow, to President Putin, that here you will have the highest-ranking, among the highest-ranking individuals to visit the capital itself, Kyiv, and it shows the level of coordination. I cannot overestimate how important it has been to have that support from the United States when President Biden includes President Zelenskyy in these addresses and the support package that he entailed the other day in terms of weapons, in terms of financial support, what that means to the people of Ukraine, the Ukrainian government, and President Zelenskyy himself. So tomorrow will be of huge importance to this government at a time when they really need it most. What's happening, these terrible, tragic events that you've seen unfolding in Mariupol and now in the east, in the Donbass region, it could not come at a more important time. It also shows a relative, stability and security in those areas where the Ukrainian forces have been able to push Russian forces away from the capital so that it's, relatively safe enough for high-ranking American individuals to come here.
That is really telling. Charlie, President Zelenskyy answered questions from reporters at a very long news conference. I had some of the highlights and shared those with our viewers. What were some of the other things that stuck out to you?
Well, first of all, the fact that he had this huge press conference and it went on for so long, I believe in a subway station. We're a little bit out of Kyiv ourselves. We'd have liked to have been there. But he was making a point of what's happening in Mariupol. He first of all said that he would speak to President Putin if the situation could be arranged. He made a point of the fighters that remain in Mariupol. We have these Russian troops that have surrounded that steel plant where you've got fighters and families. He's willing to negotiate some sort of arrangement to save the lives of the people who remain in Mariupol. And he said, if the fighters who remain in Mariupol are killed, if the Russians continue to close in and just pummel that area, then all bets are off. There will be no peace negotiations going forward. So he's sort of opened the door, but he's also drawn some red lines there. He continues to say that the Russians are pushing in from the east, and that's an unacceptable situation. But he has shown some sense of compromise toward President Putin and toward the Russians, even as all of this is going on. What they're trying to do is establish a sense of peace, or a sort of peace, or at least a ceasefire, in order to evacuate civilians in those hard-hit areas and to try to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict that's raging at the moment.
Interesting. You mentioned he had that press conference at a subway station, and at one point we actually paused while we saw a train go by. It sort of telegraphs that other message that we've heard from the Ukrainian people, that life is continuing as part of their resistance, that life continues there in Ukraine. Still, we know that there was a missile strike that hit the southern city of Odessa. What more do we know about that, Charlie?
Well, it's significant. First of all, Odessa has largely been spared some of the worst of the fighting. There have been some attacks there, but limited attacks. What we saw today, according to the Russians, they attacked what they say was a weapons facility, a storage facility in Odessa. The Ukrainian officials say that one of the missile strikes hit a residential neighborhood. 6 civilians were killed, including a 3-month-old baby. Why is this important? Well, if you look at Mariupol toward the Azov Sea, right, which is to the east of Odessa, Odessa sits on the Black Sea. It is an important strategic port city for Ukraine, which obviously makes it an important strategic port city for Russia. In the last 24 hours or so, a Russian commander has said that it has been Russia's aim to establish a land bridge, to establish a territory that stretches all the way from Mariupol to the east to Moldova, neighboring country, Moldova, Transnistria, a section of Moldova, to the west. Well, if you look at the map, across that coast, that would include Odessa itself. So it's not only worrying that Russian missiles, 6 cruise missiles, according to Ukrainian officials, have struck Odessa, but what that means in terms of Russia's intent. Was it just taking out a storage facility, weapons storage facility, as the Russians say, or is this a widening of the conflict that stretches along that coast? That is what's troubling to the people of Ukraine, whether this may just be the beginning of what might be an extended offensive in that region, in addition to what's going on in the Donbass region to the east that we've covered ourselves. We went up to Kharkiv to see the battles that are underway there as well.
Stay safe, Charlie. Regards to you and all the team out there. Thank you.